Hello there, it's your friend Phil, Project Management Trainer and Coach. I hope you're doing awesome today. We're going to be taking a look at 5 mock PMP exam questions I put together just for you to clarify a few concepts and mindsets that you should have going into the exam. So I'm going to tackle about 3 knowledge areas thereabouts today. Let's get started with this great cram list that I've got out there for you. It has every single input, tool, technique, output listed. That's in the PMBOK guide. Can you imagine having this on your phone, having this JPEG to scroll through and process the information? Do I know this? Have I got this down pat for the exam? You see, this is a totally free cram list. You can get it at tinyurl.com/PMP cram list. It also has some key things that I think you should be looking out for before you jump into your exam, okay? So it's totally free. Go get it. Let's start with the questions. Question 1. Your firm has been awarded a project to revamp infrastructure on an abandoned land for use by the general public. The project charter and the stakeholder register have been developed. What should you do next as the project manager? Should you define the project scope? Should you create the scope baseline? Should you validate the project scope? Or should you plan risks? What do you think? Now, the way this works, pause the button, give yourself 1 minute 12 seconds exactly, and I will give you the answer shortly after. So pause it. Spoiler alert, pause it, think about it. Okay, so this is a very basic question. It's only testing you on the order of things in the PMBOK guide as you go through page 61 in the 5th edition. Okay, so should you define project scope or create the scope baseline? Which comes first? Define scope is what A is describing. Create the scope baseline is create WBS. That comes after define scope. Validate project scope is not done by you. And plan risks, well, you need to know your scope first before you can adequately plan risk management to the extent needed, in my opinion. So you don't go about planning risks without understanding the scope. Okay, so what should you do? Should you define project scope? If you guessed that, you are correct. That is the first thing, the most sensible thing to do. Okay, know your scope. Know what the project is all about. Know the parameters of the project, the boundaries, the inclusions, the exclusions, the constraints, the assumptions. Know what's at stake. And then you'll be in a better shape to do that. Okay? Of course, there are other things that you need to do before you carry out plan risk management. Okay, but this question zeroes in on scope. Okay. Well, if you got that one, here's another one. Question 2. Your firm has been awarded a project to revamp infrastructure on an abandoned land for use by the general public. A requirements traceability matrix and project scope statement were produced immediately, developed as part of scoping out the project. What should the project manager have done first? Plan how to collect and manage requirements? First, create the scope baseline for guidance? Or C, validate project scope with stakeholders? Or D, execute the define scope process? Pause that button, think about your answer. So, it says a requirements traceability matrix and project scope statement were produced immediately, but this is not asking what you should do next. It's saying, what should the project manager have done first? In other words, what should you have done before the requirements traceability matrix and project scope statement? So it's a very basic question, but you could easily miss it if you miss the concept. What should you have done first before doing what you are currently doing? The answer to this is, of course, to plan how to collect and manage requirements. You should have first planned how to collect requirements before you begin doing that using the requirements traceability matrix And also, before defining scope, you should have planned how to collect requirements. Of course, without saying if you planned how to collect requirements, you were in the plan scope management process, and you should also have produced a scope management plan. Well, let's go to question 3. It says your firm has been awarded a project to carry out a significant green initiative. As your project progresses, a team member requests for a change in how biomedical waste is being stored. She states that your current method violates government regulations. What does this violation mean? Does it mean there was no consideration for enterprise environmental factors? Or there was no consideration for organizational process assets? Does it mean there was no consideration for assumptions reporting? Or does it mean there was no consideration for inclusions and exclusions? Okay, pause the button. Got a few more minutes before it hits 1:12. Alright, so let's think about these. We're going to tackle these from the bottom up. Now remember, on the PMP exam, you have the strikeout functionality, and I will be using the strikeout functionality here. So, there was no consideration for inclusions and exclusions. No consideration for inclusions and exclusions? So, when you think about this violation, would that be termed as an inclusion or an exclusion? Let's leave that at a parking lot. Let's go to the next one. There was no consideration for assumptions reporting. What is assumptions reporting? That sounds a bit bogus, so right off the bat, I'll cancel that one. B, there was no consideration for OPAs. Organizational process assets is what? Processes and procedures within the performing organization, and the corporate knowledge base within the performing organization. So this has nothing to do with the internal stuff. It says a government regulation, so we can cancel that. Okay. Let's go to A, no consideration for EEFs. Do you know what EEFs are? You need to go through the list of EEFs, and you'll find out that explicitly regulations and all of these things from the government that are mandatory are EEFs. So, which of these best fits the description? Government regulations, EEFs, or inclusions and exclusions? An inclusion is something that has to be included, has to be done. An exclusion is something that is not in the project. So this is a tough one for many people, but if you really know the definition of EEFs versus that for inclusions and exclusions, the best option in this case is the more precise term that is more binding to the words being used. Government regulations are clearly EEFs. So, if you chose EEFs, you are correct. If you chose inclusions and exclusions, it is an okay option, but it is not the best option. The PMP exam will push you to the limit on choosing the best option. In fact, some of the options, in my opinion, could be argued. Hey, these two, they sound absolutely plausible. How can you choose one over the other? It comes with a greater level of consciousness of the definitions. Government regulations, any government regulation is an EEF. Not every government regulation is necessarily an inclusion or an exclusion. So you want to take the best option that is a catch-all for whatever is at play. That beyond reasonable doubt, whatever the circumstance, will always be correct. A will always be correct. D could be correct, but not always. Okay, let's go to the next one. Your firm has been awarded a project to revamp infrastructure on an abandoned land for use by the general public. Do you notice the recurring theme in the scenario, but the change in the question? An activity list, task list, and schedule management plan were produced immediately, developed as part of scheduling the project. What should the project manager have done before this? So this should be an easy one because we've tackled a very similar question from a different knowledge area. What should the PM have done? First, create the scope baseline, estimate activity resources, estimate activity durations, or should we have planned how to manage the schedule? Think about it, think about it, think about it. So let's go from the top down. Plan how to manage the, oh, hang on. Let me give you your 1 minute, 12 seconds. Pause the button. Okay, let's start off. So, it says an activity list and a schedule management plan. A says, plan how to manage the schedule. That's already been done in the schedule management plan. Okay, so we can strike off A, can't be A. B, first create the scope baseline. When do we do that? Oh, we do that before creating the activity list. That could be a plausible option. So, just so you know, if you are at Prometric, read the instructions. You have a highlighter. With a left click and a drag, I believe it is, you can highlight an option you're curious about or you think is a plausible option. C, estimate activity resources. No, that comes after the task list or activity list. Estimate activity durations. Nope, that comes after. So again, if you're at Prometric, folks, don't forget you can strike out that stuff. That leaves you with the correct answer. So the answer is first create the scope baseline. You want to get your work packages from Create WBS. The WBS is in the scope baseline, and from your work packages, you'll break those down into your activity list. Haha, one more for you. Before I call it a day here, your firm has been awarded a project to carry out a significant clean energy initiative. As your project progresses, government stakeholders become increasingly interested about your cost performance. Which of the following metrics will enable you to report on this? Is it your CPI? Is it your earned value? Is it your cost variance, CV, or is it your SPI, Schedule Performance Index? Right off the bat, we know it cannot be something relating to schedule. We can cross that out. Okay? I hope you gave yourself your 1 minute, 12 seconds. Okay? We also know that EV on its own doesn't tell us much, so we can cancel that. Now, it's down to 2. This is where you need to know the difference between an index and a variance. A variance will tell you how much money you have spent versus how much money you plan to spend, but it doesn't tell you the level of performance at which you're operating. For example, I could have Project A, a $10 million project with a variance of $500. I could have Project B, a project of $1,000 with the same variance. So the variance doesn't tell us as much as the index. So if you guessed CPI, you are correct. It's the Cost Performance Index. I hope you had fun with these questions. Remember, the PMP exam will test you to the limit. These questions on the exam are extremely situational, and they'll put you in the driver's seat. You are the project manager. What should you do? And the questions will be even more challenging than the ones I've shown you. I'll be back with some more difficult questions in the weeks ahead as you ramp up to get PMP certified. Don't forget, go to PM Succeed. We want you to succeed. We want you to get this monkey off your back. We want you to hit the exam hard, kill it, get certified. Speak to you soon.